Imagine being in a courtroom expecting the worst, when suddenly the judge stands up, completely silent, staring at you. That's exactly what happened to this homeless veteran, and what came next changed everything. Today we're diving into one of the most powerful courtroom moments that went viral but never made mainstream headlines. It's a story about justice, recognition, and how sometimes our system actually works when good people step up. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this case matters to every single American, whether you care about our veterans or not. In downtown Portland, Oregon, where the homeless crisis has reached breaking point, 58-year-old Robert Williams sat slumped on a bench outside the Multnomah County Courthouse. His worn military jacket was the only protection he had against the cold November rain. With his graying beard and weathered face, he looked like any other homeless person you might pass on the street without a second glance. But Robert Williams wasn't just any homeless veteran. 20 years earlier, he had been Staff Sergeant Robert Williams, a decorated soldier who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan between 2001 and 2008. His last tour ended when an IED explosion left him with severe injuries and what doctors would later diagnose as post-traumatic stress disorder. Like thousands of veterans before and after him, Robert's transition back to civilian life was far from smooth. The haunting memories of war, coupled with his physical injuries, made it difficult for him to hold down a steady job. His marriage fell apart. His support systems crumbled. And eventually, after years of struggle, Robert found himself on the streets, another statistic in America's shameful veteran homelessness crisis. On that rainy November morning, Robert was due in court for trespassing and petty theft. He had been caught sleeping in the lobby of an office building after hours and had taken a jacket from a donation bin that wasn't technically open to the public. These weren't violent crimes, they were survival crimes, the kind that people commit when society has failed them. The courthouse that day was busy as always. District Attorney Sarah Chen was prepared for what she thought would be a routine case. The public defender, James Morris, had only met with Robert for 15 minutes before the hearing. It was the type of assembly line justice that happens every day in America's overcrowded court system. Docket number 47,293, State versus Robert Williams, announced the clerk as Robert shuffled forward, his eyes downcast. Judge Michael Harrison, a 62-year-old veteran himself who had served in the Gulf War, glanced down at the case file, reading through the charges and the defendant's information. Something caught his eye. He read the name again, then looked at Robert's date of birth and his service record, which had been included in the preliminary report. The courtroom fell quiet as Judge Harrison stood up, his expression unreadable. For 30 seconds, an eternity in a courtroom, he said nothing. Everyone watched, confused by this break in protocol. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. The court reporter stopped typing. Robert Williams kept his eyes fixed on the floor, unaware of what was happening. When Judge Harrison finally spoke, his voice cracked with emotion. Staff Sergeant Robert Williams of the United States Army, 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. Robert looked up, surprised to hear his former title. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied softly. "Operation Anaconda, March 2002, the judge continued. Robert's eyes widened. "Yes, sir." Judge Harrison stepped down from the bench, something almost unheard of during proceedings, and approached Robert. The courtroom remained silent as the judge extended his hand. "Staff Sergeant Williams, 20 years ago you pulled 4 men, including a young lieutenant, from a burning Humvee after an RPG attack in the Shawaikat Valley. That lieutenant was my son." The revelation hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt. This wasn't just any chance encounter. It was a moment where 2 lives that had briefly intersected in the chaos of war had somehow found each other again, in the most unlikely of places. Judge Harrison's son had survived thanks to Robert's heroism. He'd gone on to recover from his injuries, finish his military service, go to law school, and now worked as a prosecutor in Seattle. Meanwhile, the man who saved him was standing in court as a defendant, homeless and forgotten by the very country he had served. "I've thought about the man who saved my son every day for 20 years, Judge Harrison continued. "I never thought I'd get the chance to thank you." What followed was unprecedented. Judge Harrison recused himself from the case due to the personal connection, but not before using his authority to help Robert. He contacted Veterans Affairs right from the courtroom and discovered that Robert had never received the full benefits he was entitled to. Through a clerical error, His disability claim had been denied years ago, and without resources or knowledge of how to appeal, Robert had simply accepted his fate. Within hours, social workers, VA representatives, and veterans advocacy groups were in the courthouse. Robert's case was transferred to Veterans Treatment Court, a specialized court designed to help veterans dealing with issues that led them to the criminal justice system. But the story doesn't end there. It's what happened next that truly shows the power of recognition and the importance of giving our veterans the support they deserve. Judge Harrison didn't just walk away after that dramatic courtroom moment. He maintained contact with Robert through the proper channels, ensuring he wasn't overstepping his judicial boundaries, but still providing support. He connected Robert with the Veterans Justice Outreach Program, which helps veterans navigate the complex legal and support systems available to them. Within 2 weeks, Robert had temporary housing through a VA program. Within a month, he had started receiving the disability benefits he should have been getting for years. And most importantly, he was enrolled in a comprehensive treatment program for his PTSD and physical injuries. The charges against Robert were ultimately dismissed after he completed community service and engaged consistently with his treatment program. But more than avoiding punishment, Robert gained something far more valuable: a second chance. This singular moment of recognition, a judge standing up in silence upon recognizing a name, transformed not just Robert's life, but rippled through the community and eventually across the country as the story spread. Local news picked up the story first. A reporter who happened to be in the courthouse covering another case witnessed the exchange and wrote about it. From there, it spread to national veterans groups, then to social media, and finally to a few national news outlets. The story resonated because it exposed both the failures and the potential redemption of our systems. Robert's case highlighted several critical issues facing veterans in America today. First, the alarming rate of homelessness among those who served our country. According to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, on any given night, approximately 40,000 veterans experience homelessness in America. That's 40,000 people who put their lives on the line for our country, now sleeping on the streets. Second, the bureaucratic maze that veterans must navigate to receive the benefits they've earned. Paperwork errors, lost claims, and understaffed VA offices mean that many veterans, particularly those dealing with mental health challenges, simply give up on getting the help they need. Third, the connection between untreated PTSD and involvement with the criminal justice system. Studies show that veterans with PTSD are more likely to encounter legal troubles, often stemming from substance abuse used to self-medicate their symptoms, or from behavior directly related to their trauma. But Robert's case also showed how specialized interventions can work. Veterans Treatment Courts, which first appeared in 2008 in Buffalo, New York, now exist in over 600 counties across the United States. These courts recognize the unique challenges veterans face and provide tailored support rather than punishment. 6 months after that fateful day in court, Robert Williams was living in permanent supportive housing. He had reconnected with his daughter, who hadn't seen him in 8 years. He was working part-time at a local veterans center, helping other vets navigate the benefits system that had once failed him. His story had become a powerful example of both what can go wrong and what can go right in our treatment of veterans. Judge Harrison and Robert developed a friendship that respected professional boundaries but allowed for genuine human connection. When Robert celebrated 1 year of stable housing and sobriety, Judge Harrison attended the ceremony, not as a judge, but as the father of the man whose life Robert had saved 2 decades earlier. The most powerful part of this story isn't just the courtroom moment or even Robert's personal redemption. It's what happened in communities across the country as people learned about the case. In Seattle, a group of attorneys established a pro bono project specifically to help homeless veterans review denied benefit claims. In Dallas, a property developer donated a small apartment building to be converted into veterans' housing. In Boston, a medical center expanded its outreach to homeless shelters, actively searching for veterans who might not be receiving proper care. Robert's case became a catalyst for change because it personalized an issue that's often discussed in abstract terms. It's easy to talk about veteran homelessness as a concept. It's harder to ignore when you're looking at the face of a specific veteran who saved American lives and then fell through the cracks of the very society he protected. The full impact of what happened that day in the Multnomah County Courthouse continues to unfold. Veterans advocacy groups have used Robert's story in their communications with lawmakers. VA administrators have cited it when pushing for reforms to the benefits system. And judges across the country have shared it as an example of why taking the time to truly see the person standing before you matters. For Robert Williams, the recognition he received in that courtroom didn't just change his legal situation, it restored his dignity. After years of being invisible, of being seen as just another homeless person to avoid eye contact with on the street, he was suddenly seen for who he truly was, a hero who had sacrificed for his country and deserved far better than what he had received. The hardest part of being homeless wasn't the cold or the hunger, Robert later said in an interview. It was feeling like I didn't matter to anyone, like I was invisible. That day in court was the first time in years that someone really saw me. The case has raised important questions about how we identify veterans in the justice system. Many courts now explicitly ask defendants about military service, something that wasn't standard practice before. This simple change has connected thousands of veterans with specialized services that might otherwise have been missed. But perhaps the most profound lesson from Robert's story is about the power of recognition. Not just recognition in the sense of identifying someone's past accomplishments, but truly seeing them as a complete human being with value and potential. Judge Harrison could have processed Robert's case like any other, following the letter of the law without considering the person behind the charges. That would have been professionally acceptable. Instead, he took the time to see Robert Williams, really see him, and that made all the difference. This doesn't mean every defendant deserves special treatment, but it does suggest that our justice system works better when it considers the whole person and their circumstances. For veterans specifically, this means understanding the unique challenges they face and the sacrifices they've made. Robert's story also challenges us to think about how we treat all vulnerable populations in our legal system. If taking the time to truly see one person can have such a profound impact, what might happen if we approached every case with that level of attention and care? Of course, systemic change requires more than individual moments of recognition. It requires policy reforms, adequate funding for veterans programs, better coordination between agencies, and ongoing commitment from communities. But those larger changes often begin with stories like Robert's that capture public attention and humanize complex issues. 3 years after that day in court, Robert Williams testified before Congress about veterans' homelessness. He spoke not as a victim but as an advocate, using his experience to push for changes that would help others avoid the path he had walked. "I don't want anyone's pity," he told the congressional committee. "What I want is for my country to keep its promises to those who served, not just with words but with actions." Today, Robert Williams is no longer a statistic. He's a success story, a mentor to other veterans, and a powerful voice for change. And it all began with a moment of recognition, a judge standing in silence, seeing not just a homeless defendant but a hero who had saved his son's life. The courtroom where this happened now has a small plaque on the wall. It doesn't mention Robert or Judge Harrison by name. It simply reads, "Justice is not just about applying the law, it's about seeing the person before you." This story reminds us that behind every homeless veteran, every person struggling with PTSD, every individual caught in the court system, there's a human being with a story. And sometimes, taking the time to learn that story can change everything. For Robert Williams, being recognized in that courtroom was the beginning of a new chapter. For Judge Harrison, it was an opportunity to deliver a different kind of justice. And for the rest of us, it's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most important thing we can do for another person is simply to see them, really see them, for who they are and who they could be again. As we reflect on Robert's journey, let's ask ourselves, how many other Robert Williamses are out there, waiting to be seen? And what might happen if we, as individuals and as a society, took the time to look? The moral of this story isn't just about thanking veterans for their service. It's about backing those words with meaningful action. It's about creating systems that work for everyone, especially those who have given so much for their country. It's about recognizing that justice should be tempered with compassion, and that sometimes the most powerful thing we can offer another human being is the gift of being truly seen. In Robert's case, that recognition came dramatically, in a silent courtroom with a standing judge. But recognition can come in many forms. A conversation with a homeless veteran, a donation to organizations that support them, advocacy for better policies, or simply taking the time to learn about the challenges they face. What matters is that we don't look away, that we see the Robert Williamses in our communities not as problems to be solved, but as people to be supported, that we recognize their past service and their present potential, that we stand up, sometimes in silence, sometimes with our voices and our actions, and acknowledge their worth. Because in the end, that's what this story is really about. The transformative power of being seen, of being valued, of being given another chance. And that's something every one of us deserves. If this story moved you, check out my next video on how veterans treatment courts are changing lives across America. Your view makes a difference, just like that judge's recognition did.